energy efficiency is my topic that I talk about is in the interest of improving the sustainability and our path to net zero. Energy efficiency is, in many cases, the unsung hero of sustainability. You think of 70% of carbon emissions in Canada come from energy. So if you're in the energy industry, you're in the forefront of this conversation.
Thank you for joining me here today. It's great to have you on the podcast. I was looking forward to this for quite some time.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
And Emily, typically as we kick this off, one of the things that I'd like to do, and it's the audience finds very valuable, is a little bit about your background. So where did Emily grow up? A little bit about your upbringing, and perhaps who had some of the biggest influences in you on sort of during your life, whether personally or from a career perspective. It just resonates with people, and some of this will be, some of the listeners will actually be people that may know you from a business perspective, but sometimes they don't have a chance to, or haven't had an opportunity to hear this story.
Sure. Well, a little bit about myself. Full confession, I'm an American. So I feel I need to confess this up front. I grew up with a father who was in the Air Force. So my family moved around the United States. I lived in 7 different states. And so when people ask me where I'm from, I don't have a home. You know, we moved every 3 to 5 years, depending on his job. But it did set me up with the sense of adventure that I'm very, very grateful for. That and adaptability as well, as we moved from school to school or town to town and had to make new friends. You asked about, how I ended up where I am. It was pretty interesting. I had my dad and my mom met when he was stationed in Mississippi. And my mom always had this sense of, and by the way, I come from a family of 3 girls. I'm the middle of 3, with 2 different sisters. But my mom always had a sense of, my girls are going to be able to provide for themselves. They can do anything they want. And I remember that fundamentally as a young kid, particularly, if you can imagine me growing up in the 80s, and my mom and dad would always say, you girls can do anything you want. You could be the United States president. Back then it was, this impossible to imagine a woman president, at the time. And we fundamentally believed it, which always brings me to remind parents, tell your kids that they can do anything they want in their life, because what you hear as a child is what you take as a belief system through the rest of your life. It's proven. So because of that, I just had this built-in confidence. So we were very much, I very much early on just realized I loved building things. My sisters would be playing with Barbies and I would be building Legos and Lincoln Logs, if you remember what those are, or, playing with little tiny magnets. And then I eventually my parents gave me a robotics kit when I was, maybe 12 years old that I loved. So it became pretty obvious that I needed, when it came time to go to college or university, as we say here, that I would choose an engineering degree. I loved math. I loved science, and, it made a lot of sense. So, but even more so when I had to choose which engineering, it was interesting. I took a tour of the university that I had selected. I went to Auburn University, which is the last state that we ended up when I was in high school, in the state of Alabama. I noticed that of all the different types of engineering, the engineering that intrigued me the most was industrial engineering. I loved the making of things. I always liked design, but I was very fascinated by how you manufacture, how you build the products that you and I use every day. So I became an industrial engineer and started my career when I graduated in a factory, in a manufacturing plant. Every day was different. I did everything from floor supervision to project management, a lot of design work on AutoCAD back in my early years. And, I absolutely loved that intrigue. I always thought of a factory like a jigsaw puzzle of how we're going to make this factory more efficient, more effective and put more output out in, every single day. So yeah, I mean, it's funny, I work in the electrical industry, but my first passion is manufacturing, which is why I will most likely always work for a manufacturer.
No, and that's a great story, Emily. And just you moved around a little bit. Any particular areas to highlight?
Uh, it's funny, wherever I live is my favorite place. So currently my favorite place I ever lived is Toronto. But
That'll resonate.
but no, I mean, in my life, probably the two states that I really enjoyed were the last state that I lived in Nashville, Tennessee. What a great city, a great state to live in, lots of outdoors, adventures to be had there, as well as great country music. And then before that, North Carolina also has a special place in my heart as well.
Okay, so note to the audience to ask you for tips on either as they go to visit.
I have a list that I can send out of recommendations of how to spend a weekend in Nashville, because I get to ask this a lot.
And Emily, certainly I can appreciate the influence of your parents, and they often are a critical component to who we become and sort of their influence. Anybody else beyond your parents that was a big influence on your career or sort of Emily as we know you today?
A couple of key managers throughout my career. I can specifically think of two mentors that I had, one very early on and then one around mid-career that impacted the trajectory that ended up leading to where I am today. One was, honestly, it's, probably like a lot of people, my first manager in my career, who was the plant manager at a factory I was working at in North Carolina. He was very influential. He gave me a lot of stretch projects, put a lot of different trust in me to run different initiatives. And because of that, really allowed me to see how much more I was capable of by pushing me beyond my limits, or so what I thought were my limits. The other one was someone who was the president of a division I was working at. And his specific influence was he caused me to dream bigger. With a father in the Air Force, while he was very successful in his career path, it was very different than a private sector position. So having somebody pull me aside at one point in my career and say, what do you want to do with your career? Because I see the potential of you to be a president, to be a general manager and run a company someday. This opened my eyes to dream bigger and beyond where I had found myself at the time. And we talked about my career path. And it was because of that conversation that I ended up shifting a plan which had been very heavy in manufacturing and operations and project management, and being able to say, okay, if I want to be a general manager and a CEO, a president one day, I have to understand both sides of the business. Today, at that point, I had only understood, for lack of a better word, the bottom line. And then I shifted and got my MBA, took a product management job and started basically the exact 8 years I'd already spent in operations. I'd then spent 8 years in the commercial side of the business so that I could have that balance between the top line and the bottom line, how to generate that revenue, how to take care of customers, things that I could never have experienced had I always stayed in that sort of manufacturing operations life. And with that, I was able to, change my trajectory and end up taking a general manager role almost 8 years later. So it was almost 8 years in ops and 8 years in commercial. And Schneider opened the door for me to take my first general manager role.
And Emily, the Canada role is somewhat new, and I say somewhat new because when we first met, which was nearly a year ago, it was relatively new. But as time goes on, then we can't say it's new anymore. As time, what was that path from that stage on to being president for Canada?
After taking on a first general manager role of a business unit, it became very clear that, okay, what's the next path, right? From, business leader, general manager leader to CEO. And I'd had a lot of experiences in my life, even prior to joining Schneider in Canada. I'd spent a significant amount of time in Montreal, in Toronto. I'd called on utilities in Canada with previous roles, on Hydro-Quebec, Nalcor, Bruce Power, you name it. And I was always enjoying not just the business culture of Canada, but I really specifically felt at home in Canada. The culture felt more open-minded. It was very progressive, very collaborative with every team I'd ever worked in Canada. And so I remember at that time, which was probably, 8 years before, maybe not 8 years, but 7 years before taking on the role I have today, thinking if I ever get the chance to take a president role in Canada, if the position ever comes open, I'm throwing my name in. And I made that known. So I get very, very fortunate to have the opportunity to move up here in 2023 and become the president for Schneider Electric.
Well, and time flies because we're here in 2025, and that's why I said somewhat new to the role, because I can't believe how long.
Time has flown, and it's funny how quickly where you live becomes your home. And I've learned this from my entire life of moving around. Wherever I am all in, completely present. I probably feel more Canadian now than American, at least in my heart.
Well, and you're now well on your path to becoming a permanent resident. So, well on your way there. So.
That's right. I'm applying right now.
So, Emily, there will be many women and potentially a lot of our listeners thinking, and executives in general, but certainly I know this will resonate with the women listeners. That's a fascinating path, but also one that you don't see a lot of women achieving. So what were some of your tips to success? What would you say to young women out there that are either starting out right out of university or are sort of midway through their career? What advice would you have for them to say, hey, this is possible, and here's, when you were saying how your dad was telling all three of you that you could be president of the United States, and you believed it, and certainly it's much more achievable now than may have seemed back then. But how do you instill that faith?
Well, one thing that I'm a huge believer in is self-talk. The words, no matter what I just said about my parents, the words that we say to ourselves are the words we believe more than anything else. It's proven. So I spent a lot of time, I don't want to say talking to myself, but really infusing words into my mind that I may say to myself in a situation that I have them on hand, right? So if somebody is, you're facing some adversity and somebody is maybe acting inappropriate, I may have memorized the words that I say to myself of, you don't have to put up with this. That might be something I say, right? But then outwardly I say, hey, let's keep this professional, right. But internally I have several things that I like to be able to say to myself that both encourage me to keep going, encourage me to keep strong in a difficult situation. But the other thing that I think that a lot of people forget to do in their career is that to make a strategy for yourself. We make strategies every single day, no matter what your role is. A strategy for a product you may be launching, a project you're managing, for a business you're running. But do you stop and make a strategy for you? If I am a product, an entity in this industry, I need to have take the time and have all the same elements of a strategy applied to myself. Right. And at one point when I had this revelation, I think it was during my MBA program, I thought, well, I can make a strategy for Emily. These are my strengths. These are my weaknesses, my opportunities, my threats, right? This is my identity in the market that I play in. This is where I want to play this brand. And then what is my 3 to 5 year plan? How do I get there? How do I balance those things? I have a constant roadmap for myself that, yeah, it takes some time to do. You might have to do it on a Saturday or, sometimes some of these things I'm thinking about when I'm out kayaking on a river, because you do your best thinking I really believe when you're not in work. But having that time and making that time to create a strategy for yourself and your own career and then sticking to it. You're not going to run through anybody else's career plan. You're going to make your own. I am unique. You are unique, Gary. Every single person has their own unique strengths, weaknesses, et cetera, but also their unique experiences they've already collected and their unique ambitions. So my plan is mine. And I always encourage people, I said, I'm not going to show you mine. I need you to make your own, right? Because we don't copy each other. We're going to find satisfaction in creating our own roadmap.
And I love the Emily SWOT analysis. So everyone does that, and then you figure out your own plan based on your own individual SWOT analysis.
Exactly.
And Emily, this job and any executive job will be challenging and will have demands, etc. How do you detach? Like, how do you find whether it's activities that you do or sort of time to say, hey, you need a way to recharge and find a way then to get back at it with that force? What does it look like for you?
Well, as you probably have imagined by now, I'm a big list maker, planner. So with every job, and it just happens, right? As we move up the ladder and take on bigger and bigger jobs, so does the stress get bigger and multiply, right? So I don't try to pretend that I'm still a young engineer who can check out when she goes home from work. This work stays with me all the time, right? It's on my mind. I don't enjoy when, the latest news is keeping me up at night at 3 a.m. and I'm trying to figure it out in my sleep, in my dreams, how to solve for it. So what I have to do is, as I move throughout my career, make maybe an adjusted list of how to deal with my stress, because what I did to deal with my stress 10 years ago is different than what I deal with today. And then also how I de-stress in Canada is different than how I de-stressed in Nashville. So I made a list of what are all the things I enjoy. Part of the reason I became an engineer is I liked both design and drawing as well as math and science. So I got to marry those two things together. So what I found here is I have taken up painting, and there is nothing more cathartic than on a day like today, or like this weekend when we're supposed to have a lot of snow, to be able to, spend that time in the quiet painting and having to focus on something that has nothing to do with work and the detail work around it actually really de-stresses me. That's number one. The other one is exercise. I think how we treat our physical state truly does impact our mental state. And the more that I'm taking care of my exercise and diet, the better I'm going to be able to handle stress, hands down, always. So I do also make a plan to exercise five out of 7 days.
No, and that's excellent advice. And it's consistent advice here, Emily. So a hobby like painting that sort of makes you detach, that is very different than your day to day. And then exercise is certainly a common theme, because there's no way around it. Past a certain point, it's we always need to make time for it, regardless of how busy our schedules are.
Oh, for sure.
And Emily, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about technology disruption. So we see technology and AI disrupting just about any area sort of business. How do you see that playing out in the energy space and energy management space? Like, what do you think? What impacts do you foresee would happen?
The two major technology, let's say, trends that we're watching really closely, and I think have the potential to make the biggest impact on the energy, let's call it the energy landscape of the future, is AI and automation. So when I think of, we have for years sent electrical equipment into, you name it, the grid, a building, a home, an industry, and the management of electricity and power was handled very manually, maybe via some software, but it was very rudimentary. Right. as we've moved along and found, the marriage between digital technology and old equipment, operational technology, we found that with automation, with digital technologies, we can monitor and manage energy usage remotely, automatically, so that a homeowner, a business owner, an industry can optimize their power bills, can reduce energy waste, and can also, especially if you think of yourself as a hospital or an industrial use, also reduce outages as well, and quickly, if there is an outage, repair and bring this back online. Now, with the advent of AI, you have the ability to even more rapidly accelerate the repair of a down system, to improve the optimization even more beyond traditional algorithms, to the point that we should be able to see significant improvements in energy efficiency in the industry and for just everyday power users, like an airport, a factory, an oil and gas application. And why energy efficiency is my topic that I talk about is in the interest of improving the sustainability and our path to net zero. Energy efficiency is, in many cases, the unsung hero of sustainability. You think of 70% of carbon emissions in Canada come from energy. So if you're in the energy industry, you're in the forefront of this conversation. Now, couple that with the fact that of the energy we in Canada produce, over 60% of it is wasted. So you have this opportunity that if we could reduce energy waste via energy efficiency, automation, and potentially integrating AI, you could reduce our carbon emissions by almost half. At the same time, we all know that this country is facing a higher demand every single day on the electrical grid. So if we know that we need double the capacity of electricity by 2050, but we could reduce the energy usage via energy efficiency, imagine what that equation now looks like in the future. So I hope it was not a short answer, but it's truly, to me, the AI and automation are the two technologies we're watching and we will be utilizing.
No, and Emily, I don't think there was a possible way it could be a short answer, because it is complex. And to your point, efficiency, while we find a better source of energy that are low emission, etc., there's nothing better than optimizing our current usage. No better way to save than starting to optimize while you in parallel find better sources.
And if you think about it, if we're saying one of the number one solutions to sustainability is energy efficiency, we're not just saying that sustainability is good for the planet. It's also good for your pocketbook, because we're talking about reducing power bills and operating costs.
For sure. We're in an age where the consumption of, if you think about all the data centers that will support all this AI processing, etc., there's an entire ecosystem of energy usage that is emerging at a faster pace than ever, just to keep up with all the AI processing. And
that's right.
Things that had already been going up, is just now they're accelerating much sooner.
Exactly. And I think the ratio is AI generates 10 times the data of traditional digital technologies.
Emily, I'm shifting gears again to something that I want to tie into more sort of your personal path. You worked in different sort of jurisdictions in Canada, the US, etc. What's been your sort of experience? Have you found sometimes even in the same country, big cultural differences in terms of how to do business in, say, even from Nashville to North Carolina, or sort of different parts of the country, and then what that could compare like with Canada?
Do you want me to answer for both countries? Because there's certainly, I see the differences across both.
Please, yeah, I'd love to, and I'm sure it'll resonate with our audience as well, because we think sometimes that it's one country and everything is straightforward, but you need to be aware of those nuances.
Oh, for sure. There is, what I love is when I first moved to Canada, how much I thought I knew Canadian culture, but living here is a completely different situation than visiting. And completely different than doing, business remote from the US and just popping in and leaving. in the US, clearly there's huge differences in culture from Boston to Alabama, from California to Denver. There's a very different style of doing business. There's a different type of communication. In some areas you could be extremely blunt, and that's the only thing. And I'm thinking of like a Boston area, right? It's actually valued that you're extremely direct, maybe even a little harsh, what would sound harsh in the Southeast. In the West Coast, you may need to be a bit more laid back in your style of communication, not as pushy, which I find interesting, right?
Sure.
To me, being successful in business and in life is about adaptability. And I think, a lot of it comes down to emotional intelligence, being able to read the room, understand the social situation you're in. As an American coming into Canada, I have a very direct communication style, and I lean into conflict. These are two things that, I've had to have some conversations I've had to adapt my style a bit and have conversations with my staff, because in particular in Toronto, super multicultural environment, right? So you're not just dealing with third and fourth generations Canadians, you're dealing with a lot of first generation, right? And so now doing business in Canada is almost like doing business in the United Nations, right? There's people from every corner of the world. And what I found is, how do you find a common language? How do you find a common set of norms and culture in your own four walls as a company? And we've done that, right? So I've had to have more culture conversations of how are we going to be more successful, because we may call the US a melting pot. And it is, but I've learned what does melting pot means. It means that if you move to the US, you have to get in line with the US business culture. That's it. This is the culture, and become American. This is how we're going to talk. In Canada, it's a lot more open, more adaptable, and we take a little bit more time, but I also find extremely respectful, right, of the different cultural differences. So this has been my experience in Toronto. Obviously the French Canadians have a very strong culture as well. The out east have a very strong culture, and then completely different in Vancouver and Calgary. So I have had the pleasure of enjoying and experiencing everything from Calgary Stampede to the F1 event in Montreal, and I have enjoyed every bit of it, and also enjoying the different styles of business. But don't get me wrong, no matter the style, my experience with Canadians is they're resourceful, they're resilient, and they're very strong people. So communication style may be more polite and more respectful. I actually find that a good thing. So I always tell my team, I actually think we have this secret weapon. If you combine all of these things with ambition, we can be unstoppable.
100%. Oh, and it's interesting, Emily. I asked that because you have a lot of Canadians that sometimes go the other way around, work in the US as well. So they probably experience it a little bit in reverse and see where they experience a bit more directness and what they're used to, and sort of that evolution. But as a question for any executives or anybody, regardless where they are in their career, considering a potential move geographically and having done it a few times, what would your advice be to them? Because sometimes people may be a bit intimidated by that. I'm going to a new country or a new state, or even if you're within the US. What would your advice be to those business leaders or professionals?
I'd say, don't try to make your next experience the same as your last experience. Embrace, similar to how I said I don't have the same hobbies in Toronto as I had in Nashville, and the same would go from my previous locations I've lived. Embrace where you're going and enjoy the life that you will have that will be unique to that location. So in Toronto, I'm going to take up, snowshoeing. I'm going to, honestly, one of my favorite things is Canadian winter. I can't believe, the amount of shock I get from Southern Americans when I tell them I love a Canadian winter. I've discovered spas, to be honest, the different plunge pools, at these spas with the cold plunge and the hot tub. I haven't experienced this too much in the United States. Like, people in Canada know how to do winter well and have great, they don't stop. We go out for dinner. I've enjoyed the theater culture in Toronto. So I would say, take advantage of what is unique and interesting and different in your new city on a personal level. And then on a professional level, like I said before, make that strategy for yourself. You took that job to get some experience and to be able to deliver your own portfolio. We don't just gather experiences. We also gather results that we can then put in our portfolio and say, look at what I did in this particular assignment or in this location, because that's part of your brand, right? So keep your eyes focused on why you came, get done the things that you said you were going to do. And then on a personal level, make it worth it. Make it worth having these unique experiences and appreciate where you are. Don't look back.
And Emily, I think that's really important advice, because it makes it less intimidating for people that those experiences can be an important part of your life, and you can learn from all of them, and do not shy away from challenges, because every environment that you go into has a lot you can see and learn from. Like you finding out that you like Canadian winters, while you have a lot of Canadians being like, we need to escape, it's too cold.
It is very novel and new to me, but I do. I love it. You have the right clothes, you can go out in any temperature.
100%. So Emily, I'm going to pivot to a part of our podcast that we call rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So this is sort of first word that comes to mind, and just really supposed to be fun and engaging without sort of overthinking. But I do have one question I want you to think about that I'll go back to after we go through that. So okay. I asked you a lot of sort of more specific advice, but what I want you to think about is, what is one learning you've had from your career more broadly that you could leave business leaders with and be like, here's one thing I learned that I'd like to share with you, that from my learnings, and far more broadly than because a lot of what I asked was specific to geography and culture, etc. But the whatever that may be, and I'll come back to that after the rapid fire questions. How's that?
Sounds great.
All right. So the rapid fire questions, we'll start with the first one, which is, what is your favorite word or phrase?
Balance.
I like that. What word or phrase do you hate?
I hate the word unfortunately. It's too vague and not taking any responsibility.
I can totally see and appreciate that your personality would, and that doesn't surprise me at all. What word do you have a hard time pronouncing, if any?
February? Or is it February?
Well, you did great.
This month.
The month we're in. Luckily, it's a short one. So, what is your favorite word or phrase in another language, if any?
This is a good question. I have one. I love the French phrase, la beauté sauvage. It means the beautiful ruggedness. I gave it in a speech recently, and I called it the la beauté sauvage de la Colombie-Britannique.
Ooh, British Columbia. I love it. It'll really resonate with Canadians more broadly, but certainly with French Canadians.
I was going to say la beauté sauvage of a Canadian winter. It's my new favorite phrase.
And Emily, do you speak any other languages?
No, just one, just English.
But enough French to have some favorite phrases in it, so that works.
I'm hiring a tutor. I gave a small speech. I speak a little light conversational Mandarin. I had a stint in my career in China, but nothing fluent, just English.
Excellent. And the last rapid fire question, what's one word to describe yourself by?
Adventurous.
That also adds up. It's right in line with what we talked about. Sure. And I'll go back to my original question, Emily. So one piece of advice you would leave business leaders with from your learnings over time, or sort of just key things that you're like, I wish somebody had told me this as I took on sort of executive roles, anything sort of that nature?
I would say, if I could give two, one,
Two is fine.
understanding that strategic thinking is as much about saying no as it is saying yes. In fact, it might be more about saying no. So having that courage to say no will be the difference in your success. Because my experience is I tend to see so many leaders try to just please everyone and do everything, and they do everything mediocre instead of picking 3 to 4 things and just doing them extremely well and making a name for themselves. And then the second one is, don't forget to have fun. We may have a destination in mind, but enjoy the journey to get there. Stop and be present and understand these are the things I can appreciate today that happened, that went well. And your team will thank you for that because they feel it when you're enjoying yourself.
For sure. No, really, really good advice, Emily. And you're right. It's we as leaders often we underappreciate the impact we have on our teams with what we say and how we act. So smelling the roses along the way, just extremely important. And Emily, I thank you for your time today. It's been excellent and it flew by. I had a lot more questions for you, but as it always the podcast timing is always less than all the questions I have for you. But it's been wonderful to have you on here today.
Well, I enjoyed myself. Thank you for having me.